Okay, so if we look at these contemporary arguments from design, we can see that this is in a certain way in keeping with the Christian tradition. St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, way back in the 1st century, said, "Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes of eternal power and divinity have been able to be understood and perceived in what he has made." We can see signs of God in the world he created. Right? It's very biblical, it's very Christian. Intelligent design will kind of take that idea, and their vision of seeing God in created things is not where they go astray. It's when they claim that they can use created things to prove God's existence. Okay? So if we go with kind of the founder of the contemporary intelligent design argument, we have to look at William Paley, whose 1802 book, Natural Theology, gave this great analogy for the school of thought. And he said, imagine you were like in a field and you were digging in the field or something, you found a watch, right? You wouldn't think that that watch just came together by accident. You would think that someone made the watch and then someone else, buried the watch there or something. Because the watch is so intricate, it wouldn't have happened just as a random result of nature, right? You wouldn't just have all these rocks come together and, getting shined into a piece of glass and just turning into a watch by chance. No, someone had to take parts and smelt them and put them together and stuff like that to create the watch. A very intricate process. Then he says, now apply that thinking to the human eyeball. The human eyeball is so complex, he said, it wouldn't just happen by itself. There had to be someone who created it or designed it. And so he says, bam, there's your proof for God, the human eyeball. No, you're taking it too far, right? We can't prove that God exists using empirical data, right? We can say, wow, we see signs of God's existence there, but again, you can't prove it, and contemporary science, does have explanations for how eyeballs evolved through natural selection, okay? But even if it didn't, you can't just say, oh, well, you can't prove that it happened. You can't explain how it happened some other way, so it must have happened this way, right? Another application of the intelligent design theory is in just the observance of the pattern laws of nature, right? We see crystals forming in an orderly way. We see the planets revolving around the various stars in an orderly way. We see the laws of gravity, right? We see laws of motion. All these things are predictable and orderly, right? And people say, well, why is it all so orderly? Why does it all, fit together? Like, how can we predict, what's going to happen due to the orderly patterns that we see in the universe? And again, we may see that as a sign of God. We might say it might make perfect sense to us, but it's not really proof for God. And that's where intelligent design goes wrong, where they say it proves God exists, right? So, there's some things that science can't explain about the universe, like why it operates in orderly patterns, which is basically the whole subject of science, where they say, wow, look, we can predict what's going to happen now because we've seen it happen before. Then it can't tell us why that happened, right? Just like science can't tell us why the Big Bang happened or, where the point of all the condensed matter came from. So, we can say, well, those things are... we can claim that we can see God at work in that. But, just because science can't prove why it happened, that doesn't mean that the Christian faith or any other religious faith can prove that it was God that did it. Right? We can't prove or disprove God's existence. We can't prove or disprove God's agency in these things. Right? We can see it. We can understand it by faith. Right? Or the atheists can not see it or deny it, by their own kind of faith. But we have to recognize that the faith at work here is not science in the contemporary form. And so that's where you're going to see intelligent design get into some trouble. Another major scientific idea that is at odds with literalist or fundamentalist versions of Christianity, but is not odds with Catholic teaching or other non-literalist versions of Christianity is evolution, Darwinist evolution, that is, right? So Darwinism is the idea of that an evolution of species came about through random mutation and natural selection. So one of the most famous examples is, hey, human beings descended from a common ancestor as contemporary great apes, right? Does it contradict the Christian faith? Well, again, rationalists are going to say yes, because you don't need God, right, for evolution to work. So they're going to say you don't need God. There's no specific evidence for him, so he's not real. He's not at work there. If you look at the Christian faith and read the creation stories literally, God is the center of them, and He's there. So the rationalists will say, yep, those are two contradictory ideas. Darwinism and Genesis 1-3. Fundamentalists and literalist Christians, yes, they would also see a contradiction, because they say, no. In the Bible it says the earth was created in 6 days. God created all the animals. They didn't evolve from lower forms, stuff like that. So they'll see a contradiction there too. But Catholic and other non-literalist Christians, no, there's no contradiction. Because we understand Genesis in a symbolic way, there's no reason that, God couldn't create the world through evolution. As a matter of fact, as we'll see, it kind of fits with our religious view of gradual revelation. Okay, so you have faith groups that attempt to refute Darwinism. Okay, Abel again doesn't call these recent flawed refutations of Darwinism, but that's what I think he's getting at, and so that's what I'm going to call him here in this section. The first one that he talks about is creationism in general, and creationism insists on a literal interpretation of Genesis. I've seen lots of people who adhere to these various forms of creationism, intelligent design, young earth theory, stuff like that, and they often will try to take a very scientific approach or present themselves in a very scientific light, but the reason that they're coming at the reason that they're proposing the theories that they're proposing is always because they are trying to defend a literalist interpretation of Genesis. So one of these forms of creationism is the young Earth theory, and they claim that the Earth is only 10,000 years old. Again, this is to keep it with a literalist interpretation of Genesis. They believe, like, okay, there might be some evolution within a species, but they don't believe that one species evolved into another, because in the Bible it says God created, all the animals. They attempt to, and this is something new, this is something we didn't see with fundamentalist interpretation of Scripture in the past. This is a relatively recent endeavor. It used to just be that people would just say, well, I don't believe the science, I believe what it says in the Bible. But recently, this is a new thing where people are trying to say, well, I can prove that the Bible is right using science. So they try to refute science with science. So what you usually see is they're not doing very good science. For example, the creationists deny, a lot of creationists deny carbon-14 dating, which is the tried scientific method of dating fossils. They claim there's no evidence for cross-species evolution, but the fossil record really does does seem like there is cross-species evolution. I remember one time watching a program on a local channel, a local fundamentalist TV channel, and they, one of the commentators says, well, maybe the reason that dinosaurs are so further down, or maybe the reason that archaeologists find dinosaur bones further down in the ground than human bones is because maybe, like, when the dinosaur died, it fell in a hole. Which, yeah, that's a little bit rational, right? Of course, did they all fall in holes? right? Did every dinosaur fossil that they found that made it look like dinosaurs existed billions of years before humans, was that the result of them all falling in holes, right? And there's none that didn't fall in holes, so that they find them in the same level of soil as the human remains? Yeah, no, probably not. So again, it's kind of like, okay, here's scientific evidence, but it's like not very good. It's very selective, and a lot of it's just fraudulent. But it's like, if you want to believe that, then it kind of looks rational. But why do you want to believe it? Well, they want to believe it because they want to maintain a literalist interpretation of Scripture. Intelligent design is a creationist movement that has had some popularity, especially in the United States. And again, it's like we talked about already, it is in keeping with the Christian tradition. Again, we do see signs of God's presence in God's creation. But this form of intelligent design that's popular in the United States is based on a literalist interpretation of Scripture. So they're kind of trying to use these arguments from design to prove God exists. And so again, it doesn't work. It's the kind of that God of the gas thing, saying, well, that we don't know how evolution would have done that, so it must be God. Again, it's not scientific, right? It's fine, like to make arguments from design, but to claim that they offer some kind of scientific proof is erroneous. And you saw an interesting case in some of the Kansas school boards. The school boards voted to include intelligent design as part of the science curriculum. And so then one former, I think it was a former Kansas resident, invented this kind of satiric or fake religion called flying spaghetti monsterism or pastafarianism. And he petitioned the school board to have his theory on the creation of the universe included in the classroom. So that's where the whole flying spaghetti monsterism comes from. And it really was kind of a entertaining and interesting way to make a point, which is basically that intelligent design, which is actually faith in a literalist interpretation of scriptures, it's not science, right? So it's not that it was necessarily an objection to religion or a satire of all religion, but the point was well made here that you can't present faith which does not have the kind of empirical proof that science has as science, right? Faith does have evidence, faith does have reasons, but they're not the kind of things you can test in a lab like you test science if you're doing the scientific method properly. So that's, if nothing else, intelligent design at least gave birth to the very entertaining, satirical religion of pastafarianism. Okay, there's another